The beautiful game just got knocked out of its own World Cup. Joga Bonito is dead, and the team that killed it was Norway, who outpassed Brazil almost 3-1, ran the entire match, and sent the five-time champions home. And this time the great Carlo Ancelotti did not have the answers off the bench. His two big changes, Neymar and Endrick, actually pulled the whole shape apart instead of saving it. So let us put it on the chalkboard and break down the tactical story of how Norway beat Brazil 2-1 and dumped the biggest name in soccer out of the tournament. A round of 16 match at the World Cup, Brazil against Norway, a game everyone expected to be dead even. Start with the systems. Brazil lined up in a 4-4-2, with Matheus Cunha up top. He was paired with Vinicius, though as we will get to, Vinicius was not really playing as a true centre-forward. On the other side, Norway came out in a 4-3-3. And that was a surprise, because if you look closely, Sørloth was the one ending up as the right winger, and here is the thing, Sørloth is not a winger, he is a striker. So plenty of people expected another 4-4-2 with Ødegaard tucked in on the right, but no, it was a 4-3-3. And that is the first thing to unpack, because Norway wanted the ball for this match. And honestly, Brazil was totally fine with that. Brazil was happy to drop into that 4-4-2, nice and compact, leaving Vinicius and Cunha high up the field. And this is where it became clear that Norway was going to use Sørloth and Nusa as the wingers. Now Nusa is a natural winger, no problem there, but Sørloth is not. And yet, when Norway had the ball, they did not narrow. What Norway did was tuck the fullback Ryerson inside, push the lines up. But the interesting part is that Sørloth kept the width. He was the one who stretched out wide on the right. And that is exactly how Norway created danger. Because he was the player they looked for the most up top, more than Haaland, more than Nusa, hunting one thing, a one-on-one duel against Douglas Santos. And that duel was strange, something new, because normally your winger is quick and nimble, looking to dribble past the fullback, but this was different. Sørloth was beating Douglas Santos not with speed, not with tricks, but with pure physical power, with sheer size, because Sørloth is so much bigger, just bumping, barging and bullying his way past the fullback. Worth flagging, because the truth is, it is rare to see Sørloth working out in that zone. It was working, but to be clear, Norway was doing this less for Sørloth and more for Haaland himself, because obviously they wanted Haaland at the penalty spot as the attacking reference, because Haaland and Sørloth are players who, at least by build and by their traits, are made to live inside the box, to win the ball in the air, on the ground, through raw power, all of it. So the Norway coach, Stale Solbakken, solved it by parking Haaland at the spot and pushing Sørloth out wide as a winger. Curious, but it worked. Now, let us talk about the Brazil defense. It is strange that we are even talking about the Brazil defense, not something you usually do, but it has to be said, and they did not do it badly. Ancelotti is a very smart defensive coach, and above all, he loves his teams compact, so he built that 4-4-2, but normally what they did was shift as a block, meaning they slid over to whatever side the ball was on with that double bank of four, so through the middle there was no space to connect with Ødegaard between the lines, or with Ryerson, or with Berge, and this was not just about defending for Brazil, it is that Brazil planned the entire match from the back, because when Brazil won the ball, they looked to break at speed with Vinicius and Matheus Cunha. Usually those two end up running straight at the two Norway centre-backs. Brazil set the whole thing up defensively so they could counter against Norway. In fact, the first half penalty for Brazil came from a lightning-fast transition. But to understand that transition, we have to understand something else that happened in the first half. First, we have to talk about how Norway built out from the back. Normally, in a 4-3-3, the man playing as the 6, in this case Berge, becomes the main creator, the playmaker for a side, using that system. Why? Because here both Ødegaard and Berge were being marked by the Brazil double pivot. So people figured Norway would struggle to pass out cleanly, but Norway did something different. On the build-out, Ødegaard was left much more free, roaming all over the midfield, completely unshackled, and very often dropping deeper, even closer to the centre-backs than the pivot himself, meaning he was the man Norway really looked for, the one who generated the whole build-out for Norway. And that changed everything, because Casemiro was not tracking Ødegaard that far, which is exactly why he kept finding space. Now, at other moments Casemiro did follow him, but then Berge would be the one left free, and either way the Norway build-out was clean, and that is how Norway kept hold of possession. But the problem showed up when neither of those two had space, when the free man was Berge or Nusa dropping in to ask for the ball. The trouble is, he does not have that same quality on the ball, and Brazil pressed him from behind, and that is precisely what we saw on the penalty play. Watch it back. Brazil won it high by pressing Nusa, meaning Norway did not build out with the players they wanted, and that triggered a Brazil transition, vertical and fast. And about 10 seconds after winning the ball, they were in the box, where Matheus Cunha was hauled down, Christopher Aja sliding through him. And after the video review referee Ismail Elfath pointed to the spot. And with that, you figured Norway was about to fall behind, despite being the team dominating possession. But it did not happen. Ørjan Nyland, the Norway keeper, saved the penalty from Bruno Guimaraes, who tried that famous little stutter step, but it did not work. Nyland guessed correctly and made the stop. And that was only the first chapter of a truly heroic night for the keeper. Now, how did Norway set up defensively? Because, if you noticed, Vinicius, even when he did pop up, was never that comfortable attacking the Norway fullback, Ryerson. And why? Because Vinicius was not playing as a fixed 9, but instead, when Brazil had the ball, Cunha was the 9 and Vinicius tried to float out to the left. But Norway planned the defensive side of this beautifully, dropping into a 4-5-1, where once again, we have to talk about Sørloth. When Norway did not have the ball, Sørloth dropped right in next to Ødegaard to keep a line of 5, and if you notice, that left 3 defenders on the left channel where Vinicius liked to drift, so he kept ending up surrounded by 3 players, Sørloth, Ryerson, and Ødegaard. The whole idea was to make sure Vinicius could not even receive the ball cleanly, to keep him marked and still hold a compact block with that line of 5 across the middle. Something Norway did really well, and something Brazil simply could not solve, at least in the first half. But in the second half, the game cracked open through the substitutions, and curiously, it was more from Brazil than from Norway, even though Norway made theirs first. In fact, it was a surprise that Solbakken pulled Sørloth at halftime for Oscar Bob, and also took Nusa off to bring on Andreas Schjelderup. Same idea, 2 players to work the flanks and stretch the field. Practically nothing changed, only that Bob is more of a natural winger than Sørloth, but the Norway game plan stayed exactly the same. The real difference was all on the Brazil side, because here Ancelotti made the kind of changes that normally work for him, the changes you usually applaud. But tonight they did not land, and in fact, many would argue it is in those changes that Brazil lost the match. Picture all 3 swaps at once, even though they did not all come at the same moment. Out went Martinelli, Ørjan, and Matheus Cunha, to make room for the arrivals of Endrick, Neymar, and Danilo. And with that, Brazil turned into a kind of 4-2-3-1. Now you had Vinicius pushed wide to the left, Neymar basically as the number 10, and Endrick as the striker. And the key was this triangle, the one Brazil bet everything on. With that triangle, Brazil wanted the same thing to counter, but with these 3, the entire game plan now ran through Endrick, Vinicius, and Neymar. But only on the counter. Because again, and this is the whole story, Norway was the team with the ball. In fact, the moment Endrick came on, he had a golden chance to score, but a heavy touch let him down and he wasted it. A miss that, just like the penalty, would end up costing Brazil dearly. Now, you might ask why the changes were the mistake. Well, with the 4-4-2, when Vinicius was the man up top, they defended in exactly the same shape they attacked in. That 4-4-2, without swapping positions. But now in the 4-2-3-1, with Neymar as the 10, and we all know he is not there physically. Neymar is not there. So they could not drop back into the 4-4-2 with Neymar covering any of those zones. And so we ended up seeing something bizarre, because Vinicius was not tracking back either. So Vinicius stayed high, just like Neymar. Casemiro and Bruno Guimaraes were left all alone in the middle. They formed a sort of back four, but a very strange one. Meanwhile, Endrick became the sacrificial lamb, forced to chase all the way back down the right. Why? Because the left winger did not come back, and neither did the 10. That is why this Brazil line of 4 in midfield turned into a disorganized mess, because, sure, they could form a line of 4, but with Endrick dropping down the right, with Danilo having to sprint clean across the field, and with Guimaraes and Casemiro left, with no support, Norway was always going to cash in. And that is exactly what happened. On the opener for Norway, they attacked down the Schjelderup side, meaning Endrick was the one who had to recover. He did get there, but not with the urgency the moment demanded. Why? Because he is simply not used to tracking back that much, and so Schjelderup swung in, across toward Haaland, and Haaland climbed above Gabriel to power a header home for 1-0 Norway in the 79th minute. And right here the game broke wide open, because Brazil could no longer hold that 4-4-2. They were leaving gaps everywhere, and the block basically split into a kind of 4-3-3. But the game was broken now, and Haaland took full advantage to score a goal from another planet. He collected the ball from distance and drilled a low finish to the far corner in the 90th minute, where Alisson could do absolutely nothing, and with that goal, Brazil were eliminated. There was still one last penalty, deep in stoppage time, after substitute Leo Ødegaard clattered Casemiro, where Neymar scored, so at least he did not leave this World Cup without a goal, but for Brazil it was far too little, far too late. And that, folks, is how Norway knocked Brazil out, in a match where Norway simply offered more. This is not the Brazil of old. Truthfully, it has not been for a while. And in fact, this was a World Cup where Brazil leaned more and more on transitions. It had been working, and so had the changes for Ancelotti. But this time, they just did not come off. And look, nobody is really here to bury Ancelotti, because he often gambles and it often pays off big, but this time, it did not. Still, the Neymar move never clicked. And the same goes for the Endrick one. Because Brazil even had the chance to settle it inside 90, since they missed that penalty that would have made it 1-0. If that goes in, the game opens up more for the counter. And Endrick had his moment too, right after coming on, but the ball just would not fall for him. What should really worry Brazil, though, is the statistic. Literally, Norway nearly tripled Brazil in passing, completing 617 passes to just 279 for Brazil. That is incredible. Brazil with barely 279 passes all match. That is a knock on Brazil, but also a tip of the cap to how well Norway is playing. After 28 long years away from a World Cup, you can now safely call them the revelation of this entire tournament, and the weight of this is hard to put into words. A nation of barely 5 million just knocked out the 5-time champions and handed Brazil their earliest exit since 1990. It was the 6th straight tournament that Brazil went out to a European side. And here is the twist of the knife. Norway was the one team Brazil had never beaten. The last time these two met at a World Cup, back in 1998, Norway also won by the exact same score, 2-1. History just repeated itself, beat for beat. The night belonged to two men: Haaland, whose double pushed him to 7 goals and level with Messi and Mbappe at the very top of the Golden Boot race, and the keeper, Ørjan Nyland, who stopped the penalty and then stood on his head all night long to keep Brazil out. He was the true difference maker. And then there was Neymar. He came off the bench, tangled with Nyland, buried a stoppage time penalty, and then sank to the turf in tears. For a lot of people, it looked like the final act of a Brazil legend, with that goal landing in the same New Jersey stadium where his international story first began. Now, Norway march on to their first ever World Cup quarter-final, down in Miami, against the winner of Mexico and England. This fairy tale is not over yet, and if you enjoyed this breakdown, drop a comment below and tell us who on earth you think stops Norway now.